right, so this is your day one training where I would be giving you an introduction about your training period and the roadmap, the timelines. And also I would be touch basing on the open source and the importance of open source while driving this project and the training. And I'm Kamal. I would be walking through you this session. And as I discussed, I would be covering all the basics, roadmap, whom to contact as the first point, and a little more nitty gritty features about your training. And also talking about the open source and how it's become an integral part of a developer's life and how we use open source day in and day out. So today I have Mr. Ratnakishore, the Associate Vice President of Engineering, joining me in the session, who would be also highlighting few details about the training. On to you, Kishore.
Thanks, Kamal. So welcome you all for this training. So I think this is the first training that we are conducting as part of Application Library Engineering Group. So welcome all of you. I think some of you have met yesterday during the introduction session. I think some of the people I think will be joined today. A warm welcome to all of you. So this training, I think there is a detailed agenda, like we'll be focusing on importance of open source, which Kamal will be driving today. And then we also have a detailed session on the mobile application development and the history and the details about that. Next, we have a library usage and how different libraries are the application components that will help developers reusable components in their application development, how it can help to fasten the development of their applications. This is the intention. So this we are going to discuss tomorrow, and there will be a couple of sessions will be there by Mr. Valluri. And thereafter, we are going to deep dive into the Harmony OS. So there is a lot of challenging work looking at us as part of this community now, where we can contribute back to the Harmony OS by developing some libraries, and then some of the libraries porting to the Harmony platform. So it's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to learn the basics and then start contributing back to the community. So feel free to raise any questions. There are many Java and Android experts here, and as well as Harmony OS experts also. So anything, feel free to learn, and then let's have a pleasant journey throughout this training period. That's all. Thank you very much. Back
Thanks,
to you,
Kishore.
Kamal.
All right. So I think Kishore already gave a brief idea as to what the agenda is, but let me also give you a little more detailed analysis, because the agenda seems to be very straightforward, where we'll have the welcome session today and the open source training. And then, as mentioned, we would have the details of your mentor, the code of contact, the team whom you have to contact, and who's your first line of support, and few details about the open source, the contributing guidelines, and the GitHub, how it plays, how we use it day in and day out, and the tools. And every day we be a part of this open source community, but we don't know what is the right role we fit. Are we a maintainer? Are we a reviewer? Are we a developer? What role or where do we fit in? So we're going to see all those details today, and also a few analysis using the Octoverse tool, and how community management also plays a very important role while you're actually dealing with open source. So today we're going to crack all of these. And if you look at the roadmap as suggested today, we would have the introduction and the application development part, the history of mobile development. What is this mobile development process looks like? Now, when I say mobile apps, there are different types of apps. You have hybrid, native, web apps. Now, which one do I really choose? And there's so many questions revolving around these technologies or cross platforms. Now, when I say frameworks, I have Flutter, React, Xamarin, Ionic. Now, everybody has this question now, which one to start? Which is the best one to start? So I think you can keep all your questions for today's session, where Srini would be covering, and you can ask him all these questions. And I think as a developer, or even as a project manager, if you're working with any of the technology, it's very important to have a good understanding of the existing frameworks that's available in the market and how do they perform, because that's when you would be in a better position to answer your client if they come up with a new product or a new plan, and they ask, okay, Kamal, what am I supposed to do? Which technology do you think would be apt? So you should be in a right mindset rather than just not sticking to one technology and just monotonously using that. And then later on, you would also be starting with the introduction of library usage, where Mr. Valluri would be talking about it. He would talk some of the top 10 libraries or introduce you to the libraries and the domain specific libraries. And then we will move on to the in-depth deep dive into the Harmony OS, which Mr. Sharath would be covering. He would cover the architecture part, the development fundamentals, the environment preparation, and the abilities part. And then later on, everything would be about hands-on experience with Harmony OS. So whatever you learned until now, the fourth section would be the complete hand-on experience. And then we also made the contributing guidelines to be a very vital role in this training module, because in order to be active in this community or active in a part of open source ecosystem, you need to understand what are the in and outs of the contributing guidelines. Today you might find an X technology, but tomorrow you might find a different one. So the contributing guidelines, the open source rules, they all remain the same. So it's good to understand them and then learn a new technology. And then later you would be working on Harmony OS projects, which your mentors or the community team will communicate with you further, and so that you can get your hands really dirty with coding. So if you look at the timeline, we are starting at the end of May, that is today, and it would go until June first week with your training sessions. And then the complete June and July will be a full-fledged working on your Harmony OS, whether it could be assignments, library, projects. So anything, this is what your timeline looks like. All right, code of conduct. It's really important. If you work in any organization, if you work for any nonprofit or any small project, every time you have this code of conduct, contributing guidelines. Why do they really have this? This is just to make sure that everybody are in the same path. Share your ideas, respect, participate, encourage. That is, if you have an opinion, you have to be encouraged. No abuse is tolerated. Have fun exploring something, educate and knowledge sharing, which I always agree, because you learn and you keep it to yourself, you're nowhere growing unless you share it with someone. And then conduct yourself courteously and trust. So be professional, kind, considerate while you're discussing, or if there is any discussions happening, respect personal boundaries and preference, and make sure you follow all of this to form this amazing community and enjoy throughout this training period. And here you get to meet your mentors who are industry experts. And here are the list of mentors where I'm sure most of you have already interacted with them and already started interacting with them during your project process or self-assessment. In case you've not assigned any mentors, do not panic. After the session, you can reach Mr. Wilfred, who will assist you further in case if you don't have a mentor. And any questions, you can contact them on Slack or shoot an email. So these are the list of mentors. All right. So we've been all talking about community. So we do all also have all the social medias up running for this AppLab community. Request to all of you to join all these handles and to be a part of this community. In case if you have not been, they would add these Slack channels or these all the social media handles on the comment section, or we would send you an email if you haven't joined. And if you have joined, I would request everybody to actively participate, because we have articles getting published or videos every week discussing about the latest trends in open source or in Harmony OS, and request you to have a look into it. And if you're not still part of it, please join Slack, because all the communications would be going forward in Slack. And we also have interesting events, hackathons, meetups happening. And if you're active on Slack, you'll get to know what is it. And please do not miss it. And I'm going to freeze the screen for a couple of seconds. And if you want to take a screenshot, you can. Later, this will also be shared with you. If you haven't joined any of them, please join. All right. So any issues, concerns, technical queries, the first point of contact are these two email addresses. One is the support team and one is Wilfred, who is managing this community. So you can contact him and ask all your questions, concerns, and you can raise your issues. In case if you're not able to reach any of your mentors despite contacting them on Slack, I'm sure we would have someone at least reaching out to you. In case not, you can reach out to these email addresses. All right, so coming to the open source. So the upcoming slides will give you a sense what this open source is all about, and how open source played and still continues to play a vital role to the world's technology infrastructure. So we're going to dive deep into and understand what is open source, how did it come to existence, and what are its pros, cons, and all those details. I truly believe this line, which says managing an open source project requires different demands on management and leadership. And it's very true. And it's completely changed my overall perception and my working style when I really started working on open source project. I think if your open source is managed in a right way, you can actually deliver the industrial strength and at the same time meet the user need, because these are the two things we always kind of handle and provide solution. Now by doing this, what are we trying to achieve? A fully extendable and a maintainable over a long period of time. And also, the resulting code is much more consistent and easier to manifest. Because whenever I say people working on open source, they pick a project, they start pull request, and they start working, but they really don't really understand the essence of an open source project. Today, we will try to break and see what really open source is all about, rather than just bug fixing. So, well, before I start dwelling into this open source, let's see when actually this open source really started. It's not just a decade back. It's like way back in 1950s it started. If you see the 1950s, the software and compilers were delivered as part of hardware purchase without any fee. So open source was way back in 1950 itself. And in 1970, we had a software from IBM, and in 1980s, we had launched the GNU project. In 1990s, we had the first version of Linux. Mozilla was started. OSI project also was started. And in 2000, we had Apache, where they developed and maintained an open source community. And MySQL PHP was installed on more than 2,000 million websites and more than 2 million web servers. Now, if you look at a day to day life, you must be using at least minimum 5 tools while developing an application or working on any project. And if you see most of them out of 10 or 5, 8 of them would be completely open source. There would be only 2 which is kind of licensed. So what's wrong with the license project, or what's so interesting about open source project? So we will see all of them. Now, if you consider an IDE Eclipse, it's open sourced. If you look at a Notepad++, it's open sourced. Any of the SDKs, Android, Flutter, it's open sourced. So when open source has been so much welcomed by the community, we really need to understand the nitty gritty features about it, how to be a part of it, and how we can really make it useful and better the more software development process. So let's see all those part. So before, like you, even before starting open source project, I was absolutely working in an enterprise project, and I was really happy, content, and that was my working model. But definitely, it had a lot of pros and cons. If you see, the, I mean, the pros. If I see the pros, cons part first, I could see that they always follow the strict guidelines, a very organized way of dealing things, or design document first, and then the coding and the testing. They literally avoid taking risk as much as possible because of this approvals, rules, protocols, and information was always private, and very less of amount of information was always exposed. So that kind of constrained me and did not allow my creativity side out. But at the same time, if you look at the pros, it has a good support system, its user friendliness and unified experience. And I was pretty content with this working style, but still I was feeling that something was really pulling me and I was not able to get the creative side of mine. Say example, I was working on a notepad and I would really wanted a feature I could actually build that feature. I knew it, but since it was a licensed software, I couldn't do anything. So that kind of pull was always there when I was using a enterprise or a closed project. So that's when I said, okay, let's give a try to open source and see how it works. And trust me, I never turned back again, unless if it's really a licensed version. There's certain fact also when we, I mean, maybe a decade back, when people used to hire a technical expert, they used to look for skills like, okay, are you good at Java, are you good at PHP, any of the XYZ technology. But these days, first thing what they ask, have you worked on any of the open source framework? Can you give me the reference of the open source link? So this kind of gives us a pinch that companies are adopting open source, they are welcoming it, and they have made it as a policy of the company rule that open source contribution or skill is mandatory. So you can see the kind of emphasis companies are getting into open source. So if you haven't started one, definitely look for one and start. And in my later slides, I'll let you know how you can use these factors to judge which one is a good one and pick up all this. For me, open source is all about three factors: creativity, community, flexibility. It keeps revolving around this because when I say flexibility, it can be Java today and it can be Kotlin tomorrow. Creativity is like whatever factors you come up with, it's your own ideas. And at the end, all this we are doing is to build this awesome, flexible community so that we have a good rich of resources, people contributing all over the world with sharing their knowledge. So it all revolves around these three aspects: creativity, flexible, and community. So if you ask me, then okay, I got to know about the history of it. Then what are the other things that I really know about it? Where does the code of contact takes place? Only is it in the issues or pull request, or is it only in the community activity? Then a next question arises: who is this code of conduct for? Is it for the community members, or for the sponsors, or for the maintainer? Now, then the next question comes: what if someone violates the code of conduct? So it's always good. Why am I emphasizing so much is you always need to have a code of conduct file in your project. Say if you want to build a plugin, you want to build a project which you want to open source it, have a code of conduct, and also make sure that it is visible in your contributing or a readme file, which is the face of your project. And it's very important as well. So as I mentioned, code of conduct, what is the next thing? You definitely know that it's the contributing guidelines. So you can create a guidelines to communicate how people should contribute to your project. That is what this guideline is all about. So for if I consider a repository owner, contributing guidelines are a way to communicate how people should contribute. And for the contributors, it will help them verify what they are submitting. Is it a well-formed pull request or opening a useful issues? Because I still see people just like that, they open issues, they don't even see the existing issues if someone is someone already working on it or something like that. They randomly create issues with no screenshots, no issues detail, just they say that this feature is not working. What is not working? Which operating system are you using? When is this occurring? So there are a lot of details you need to follow when you're really kind of contributing or raising issues. So for both owners and contributors, contributing guidelines saves times actually. Or else what happens is most of the time it gets rejected. And you can see, and you can literally see people, I mean, the maintainers would literally reject your pull request and you want to know for what reason it's been rejected. So follow the standard rules and definitely you would help others also in solving this issue in case if they also have a similar one. So if you ask me, okay, I got to know about the code of conduct, I got to know about the contributing guidelines. Now, what do I start next with this training process? Join the social handles. That is either Slack or emails or any of the social handles. Read the code of conduct. Read the development guide which we have given you, whether it could be setting up the environments or the self-assessment or the porting or any of the guides that we have given you. Design documents. Please ensure that you go through all these documents, self-assessment, and then contribute. Yes, we love your input because we want to make contributing to this project as easy and transparent as possible. And it's just not about just reporting a bug, it could be discussing the current state of the code, or submitting a fix, or it could be contributing a or proposing a new feature, or becoming a maintainer. So it's just not only fixing a bug and then just saying, okay, I work towards the open source. No, these also play an important role as a open source contributors. So just don't be in that one bubble, look at the other bubbles which could be of various roles in an open source ecosystem. GitHub. So the moment I say open source, the first thing everybody thinks about it or comes to mind is the GitHub part. Millions of developers and companies build, ship, and maintain the software on GitHub. And it's one of the largest and the most advanced development platform in the world. That is what I would say. And I've been working on it for a long time. But still, if I say GitHub, there are few things which remains on top notch on the list. It's Git, repository, workflow, setup, commands, readme, collaborate. This is something mandatory. And I still find people find it difficult to understand between Git and GitHub. So today I'll try to explain. GitHub is a website where it's a cloud-based service that actually helps developer store and manage their code. Simple. But Git is a version control, which means that the entire code base, the history, is available for every developers on computers, which allows for easy branching and merging. So that's the difference between Git and GitHub. Next, the term that I always frequently hear is the repository, which contains all your project files. Each file's revision history you can discuss, manage your project works within the repository. So after that, we have something called workflow. It's a lightweight branch-based workflow that supports a team. So whenever I start a project or work on a project, I always follow these rules. Create a branch, add commit, open a pull request, discuss it, review your code, deploy, and then merge. So if you have a kind of a blueprint, maybe for few of them it might go here and there with few differences, but if you follow this blueprint, no matter what open source project you work, you would be good to go and you would not make any minor mistakes or anything as such. It would be very clean process because I've seen so many people pulling their hair when they're really doing this merge and pull request. So follow that particular protocol and hierarchy and you would be good to go. Environment setup, commands. Get your commands well, especially with the git commands. Push, add, commit, difference, reset. Have a cheat sheet which gives you all the differences and the details about it. And readme. I think a good documentation is the key to the success of any project. When I'm looking for projects, the first thing that I look for is it's not who's contributing or how many people are contributing. I all look for is the readme file, which is the face of the project. Just by looking at the README file, I can really understand if I really want to contribute to this project. They would give a very systematic details. What is this project? Who is it for? Targeted audience? What would you be able to achieve? How to set an environment? If you would like to contribute, what is the guideline? What is a code of conduct? And all the details. If you find something like that, trust me, blindly, you can start working on these projects because they spend so much of time maintaining this. And also the contributing guidelines. It's a great way to get into the real world software development. And even if you have this experience when you start working in your corporate cultures, it would be really easy to maintain large projects. And also, there is another point inside every repository, there is something called insights. It's like a graph icon. So, looking at the insight, it tells you how the health of your project, how your project is being um, performing in the market, and what is the health related terms of this project, where it's kind of dropped down in the quality wise or an issue wise. So, it also gives you the health insight of the project. So, if you've not been observing that, try to look for one. So we do have an applet group GitHub account as well. So we have a couple of repository. This is a couple of days back. So we have new repository added. So I would request everybody to join the GitHub page as well. And in a couple of more sessions, you would be given libraries to start working or code to start adding on to the GitHub part. So watch out for this. If you find any issues, any contributions that you would like to do in terms of documentation, fixing any issues, or any suggestions, you're welcome to do. And the link would be given in the comment section. Okay. So when I look in a GitHub, these are the main things that I really look for. One is the fork part. Another is the pull request. Issues. Why did I emphasize on the issue is I've seen so many people creating duplicate issues. They don't really get into the issues part. Say if someone has already created an issue for say the background is missing, or some functionalities, Firebase credentials are not working, or something like that. Instead of you creating, or if you have gone through the same issue and you have solved it, you could be one of the contributors here. You can actually add and tell what exactly made you to solve that issue. So that way you are being a contributor and also a part of this community. And never try to update anything on the main branch. Create a feature branch, add it, and then you would have the maintainers looking into it. README file, which I said always as the face of the project, the clone URL, and the download part. So these are the main things that you really look for, and the wiki pages, which gives you a more in-depth detail about the project. And as also I mentioned, there's something called Insight, which you can find it. Yeah, this was the one that I was talking about, the Insight part, where you can actually look for the health of your project. So next time you get to work on any of the open source projects, definitely look for one. All right. So until now, we have been seeing all the code of conduct, the contributing, what is open source, the history of it, what rules I have to follow. But here are certain things that I follow, or we follow rigorously when we are contributing. There are so many repositories to open issues. Like, you have so many open libraries, but which one to pick? Never pick something, if you're really new, never pick something very large, like work on a media player open source libraries or open source project, because definitely it will be overwhelming. Look for something like first time committers, first time projects, something like labels on those bases. Read the README document, and then set up the environment, fork it, clone, create a branch. Do not directly commit on the main branch or delete it. Document whatever you're doing, document it, test it, and then submit it. So these are the kind of steps that you follow if you are a first time open source contributor. In case if you're following something else, please do share it in the comment and let us know what is that different you're following, or would you like to share your open source experience. And also read the project contributing guidelines, repositories, and there might be contain some useful, helpful tips as to how to successfully contribute to this project also. So look for one. So moving on to the open source tool. So as I mentioned that on a day-to-day basis, I use so many tools for developing applications or any of my software related work. And most of them out of 10, I would find at least 8 to be open source. Now, these open source tools are built and are unique by developers and for developers. And this is nothing to do with profit. So that way, if you see that every day I have at least minimum 5 of them used. So if you see Git, I'm using it. If you see Eclipse, Android Studio, everything, even a plugin also has been open sourced. Even any of your Chrome extensions, they're also being open source. So it's not that always open source means fixing a bug, working on a feature. It could be working on plugins, working on documentation, anything. So if you haven't heard about Eclipse, it's one of the Java focused IDE. What is NetBeans? That is also an open source IDE to develop, create desktop and mobile applications. Ruby on Rails, it's an open source web application framework. Cordova, it's another mobile application development framework like Flutter, React. Bootstrap, that is also a front-end component library used for building responsive projects on web. Atom, it's again another text editor. So you've been using all this and we didn't even realize that it's been open sourced. So at least today you would at least try to give a try to see what are the available open source tools, and the tool that I'm using, is it open sourced or not? So definitely there are tons of it, but there are a few of them which I thought I'll mention here. Okay. So you might say, okay, Kamal, you know what? I got to know what open source is, the history of it, what are the contributing guidelines, what is the blueprint, and everything. Now, where do I actually fit? I've been contributing all these days, or I'm yet to contribute, and I don't know where do I really fit in. So definitely we have roles. So you could be a contributor, or you could be a developer, or you could be a verifier, approver, or a project lead who could manage all the requests and then kind of manage this project. So, is this the only role? No. As I mentioned, you could be translating documents, providing feedback, requesting new features, testing reports or fixing bugs, working on wiki pages. Once you gain enough knowledge working on open source project, I think you can start helping new users also who have no experience. That itself is an open source contribution. And you can also engage more active forms in marketing or representing in conference and workshop. How are you using GitHub with your project, and how is it really helping you to deliver a sustainable product to your client? Creating FAQs. Trust me, creating an FAQ is one of the best thing that you could actually do in an open source project. Because whenever a person tries to start working on your project, definitely you would stumble here or there. Somewhere you would have issues. So if you have an FAQ that clearly tells how organized, how efficient you are in getting things solved. And if you don't have one, create one. How to tutorials, basic guidelines for first time committers, developer guide. So there's so many roles that you could fit in. It's just not these roles. So open source is so vast and diverse. It's like an ocean. You can dive in and you can, in fact, create new roles also apart from these. So, okay, we have learned about all things about open source. Now, there are certain analysis that has been done. So, Octobus is one such where it's a survey that GitHub conducts every year among its developer to take the pulse of the community. So they give you detailed data based on countries, contribution, languages, projects, and I always go through this. Just not to go through this, I have to do. What I do is, even though I have specialized in a particular technology, every day as a developer, you need to keep yourself updated with the latest technology. Which is the language that is performing really nice? What is the growth of the particular, how many issues were created in this particular project? Which is the top library? Always keep yourself updated with it. And this one survey actually gives you a detail. So that if you go type on Google Octobus, it'll give you an entire detail about it. So if you look at it, the last year's survey from October, I mean, I would say end of 2019 to October 2020, we had 56 million total developers on GitHub. And we had 60 million new repository created last year and 1.9 billion contributions added in the last year. So you can see the number is really huge. And you can see how many people are really adopting open source, and everything is happening open source now. Since everything getting online, a lot of tools are getting open sourced, everything is happening. So you can see the contribution that is happening here. And if you see the geographical distribution of these active users, over this years, we have seen GitHub kind of growing globally in size and diversity. So it's just not numbers, it's a kind of project, and skills of contributors are expanding. So the leading being the North America, and then Asia, and then Europe, and so on. And if you look at the top languages over the here, these are the list. And maybe next year when they do a survey, you would have new languages also into the picture. So always keep having a look into this website just to keep yourself updated as an open source contributor. Okay, so you've learned about your open source factors. As I mentioned, creativity, flexibility are the two factors which really plays an important role as an open source contributor. But there was another factor, which was the community management. So community also plays an important role. So what I would suggest is that always also add another file called support.md file. Other than just code of conduct, contributing, license document, you can also add something called support file, which actually let people know about ways to get help with your project. That is one file. Accessing a project's community profile, that is also another one, where under your repository name, that is the insight part which I was talking, which actually tells you about the health of your project and decide if you really want to contribute to that project or not. You can also include licenses in your repository to make it who has, whether anybody can pick your project or do you have any restrictions in picking up. So there's an exclusive link which talks about licensing. So please have a look into it. If you are going to work in open source, it's very important to know because you cannot fork every library just like that because there are certain restrictions and licenses available on them. Create guidelines to communicate and how people should contribute to your project, because you are not going to stay as a developer for another 10 years. You might work for 2 or 3 years and then you want to move on to a next role where you want to maintain this project and you want people to contribute, right? So you're going to move into a different shoe of a position, right? So you want people to help you with the project. So you need to develop the communications and the community skills also. So for that, understand how the community works, adopt a code of conduct, define the community standard, signal a welcoming and inclusive project, and outline procedures for handling abuse. Take if anybody is violating, take actions accordingly. Encourage and helpful contributions to your project with labels. Always, whenever you see issues being created, you would have labels to it: beginner, Java. So that way, people will understand. It will be easy to filter out issues when you're doing some kind of analysis. Also, it also highlight the opportunity for people to contribute to your project. It's all about helping and sharing knowledge here. And yeah, that's it. I think by this session, you must have got an idea and at least a vague idea as to how open source is and is playing an important and a vital role in day-to-day life